Joining me now, Michael Hardaway, former communications director to Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and Brendan Buck, MSNBC political analyst and former press secretary to former House Speaker John Boehner. Good to see you both. So, Michael, you first here, because Trump has attacked the media from multiple directions. He has denied the Associated Press access to the White House. He has sued CBS and other organizations. He's called the press the enemy of the people repeatedly. And now this. Bit by bit, what impact does all of this have on an independent press if it is allowed to continue?
Well, obviously, this is red meat for the base, where you attack public broadcasting and really just attack media so that you ruin their credibility, so that when they report on the illegal things you do, people don't believe it. But in reality, Donald Trump is in trouble. He's kind of like that boxer who's already taken some big blows in the first round. And so because he's got falling polling numbers, because prices are up, because the economy is shrinking, he's throwing red meat to his base, which is attacking the media, attacking the press, and attacking Big Bird, which I just don't understand.
So, Brendan, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting provides a key component of emergency alert systems. It provides free children's educational programming, Big Bird included. In some areas, you have public stations being the only, or at least primary, local news source. Do people really understand what they could lose if CBP is defunded?
Yeah, we watch a lot of PBS in my house with a couple little ones here. Look, the question of whether the federal government should be funding PBS and NPR is not a new one for conservatives. Donald Trump didn't come up with this. Republicans have been talking about undoing this kind of funding for literally decades because it's just a question of whether it's appropriate. I don't think that's what's going on here. I don't think Donald Trump has it out for PBS because he has some principle against government-directed media. I think he doesn't like them because some of the programming, perhaps on NPR, is critical of him, and that is unacceptable to him, and he will not tolerate that kind of thing. The answer to this, as most of the things we talk about, is having Congress write a law that says that. And it is not within his authority to just say that, even though Congress for many years has provided funding for these things, to just say we're not going to do it anymore. Donald Trump seems to think that he exists outside of the bounds of appropriating and law. And yeah, I think there would be political blowback if all of a sudden children's programming is not available. But he doesn't care about those things when the alternative is being criticized or what he deems as being criticized. And that ultimately is what drives a lot of his decision making.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens there. But meantime, Michael, there's speculation out there over who's going to be the new national security advisor after Trump announced that he was nominating Mike Waltz as UN ambassador, which, of course, comes after the Signal Chat security leak. Axios reports Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller is now the top contender. Marco Rubio is temporarily serving in the role, though some say Trump could make that permanent. Your reaction to the changes, and does this tell you that embattled Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is not going anywhere?
Well, it's interesting. You have Marco Rubio, who has 4 jobs. He's CEO of 4 large organizations. There's no human being that can do all 4 of those jobs effectively. And honestly, as Secretary of State alone, that's a big enough job for one person. Having Stephen Miller in that role would be even worse. And I don't think I thought I would ever say that, but the idea that we have to choose between Stephen Miller, who appears to be a terrible human being, and Marco Rubio, who's got 3 other jobs in addition to this one, seems like a no-win situation for America because these are all very serious roles in a very serious time.
Absolutely. So, Brendan, you have Marco Rubio's role in this administration. I mean, look, it is getting bigger and bigger. He's now Secretary of State. There's interim national security advisor, acting administrator of USAID, acting archivist. NBC reports he's figured out how to get in Trump's inner circle, including a, quote, MAGA charm offensive and spending as much time with Trump in the White House as he can. Are you surprised at all how much things have changed since 2016 in their relationship when Trump labeled him Little Marco?
Well, I think it's reflective of a lot of the shift in the party, and I think a lot of the resistance within it has sort of folded and gone away, and Marco Rubio probably understood that and has found himself in a pretty nice spot. Look, as somebody who's sort of more of a traditional conservative Republican, I'm quite okay with Marco Rubio being at the center, with knowing that some of the alternatives are not going to be any better off. Whether he has to say the right thing in front of Donald Trump and sort of be a good soldier in the administration. I know at his core, Marco Rubio still has a worldview of what the United States' place in the world that is consistent with what we've talked about for decades on the conservative side. He believes in strong American leadership, the importance of defending our national security through a strong military. So if he has the president's ear on these issues, I'm okay with that. Now, do I think that it is practical to have all of these jobs? No. Do we need a full-time national security advisor? Yes. So I don't know exactly what they're doing here. This feels very ad hoc, and I don't know how seriously we can take this as like a real arrangement. But Marco Rubio is doing what he needs to do in the new Republican Party. And again, frankly, I'll take that over some of the other names you'll probably see floated for it.
Like Stephen Miller?
Bingo. Yeah. I mean, look, I've known Stephen Miller for a long time. He's probably capable of doing multiple jobs because he doesn't do anything other than sort of advance Donald Trump's agenda. But he also has views that I think are sort of go beyond the bounds of what maybe even law. Yes, a lot of this sort of what I would consider lawlessness of this administration comes from Stephen Miller.
Got it. Michael, Kamala Harris spoke about the economy Wednesday night in her first major speech since the election loss. Let's play part of that right now.
Courage is contagious. The courage of Americans who are banding together in the face of the greatest man-made economic crisis in modern presidential history. Some people are describing what's been happening in recent months as absolute chaos. And of course, I understand why. And it's certainly true of those tariffs. Tariffs that, as I predicted, are clearly inviting a recession.
What was your takeaway from her speech, Michael?
She's right. Again, I mean, 89% of Americans think that Trump's trade war is going to drive up prices on the things they care about. He's underwater in nearly every demographic on whether people think he should move forward with this trade war that hasn't even kicked in yet. He bullied Amazon into not displaying how much more those goods would cost because of his trade war. That, to me, says that he's on the wrong track. Most Americans know he's on the wrong track. And Kamala was right. Again.
I'm curious if you are, Brendan, shocked that Donald Trump said in the Meet the Press interview with Kristen Welker that he's not really concerned if a recession comes Americans' way.
I'm mostly struck that he seems to be accepting reality that this is going to get bad soon. I mean, Donald Trump is never one to show any weakness. Between that comment and the comment he made about having two dolls, I think this is a person who is sort of understanding that what he had long talked about as being this like easy way to change American manufacturing is not so easy, and he might be in for some tough politics.
Okay, Michael and Brendan, good to see you guys. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.